Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll be splitting my time with my friend from BC Southern Interior. I looked forward with some trepidation, I suppose, to be a part of this important debate. Trepidation only in the sense that the time is so limited, particularly because the government has now moved to shut down this most critical debate. And with trepidation because the complexity of this issue requires all of us as members of Parliament to rise to our very best and attempt to decipher, interpret one of the most complex regions of the world and what Canada's role should be. I represent the northwest of British Columbia, Mr. Speaker, a beautiful part of the world that often knows peace, of proud people, courageous people, and with history and stories that invoke great pride for me as a Canadian. And these are people that are proudly Canadian and send me here to speak on their behalf as best as I am able. And when I think of the people of northwestern British Columbia and how proud they are to be Canadians when they travel abroad and here at home, I speak with a voice today that speaks of the deepest held Canadian values of compassion and courage and understanding and engagement for the world. I seek not to degrade the debate, as some of my friends across the way have done, by talking about those that have no spine, those that have no courage, for simply opposing the government's intentions and plans. For to rise up and stand against the government's intentions if we think it does harm to our country is a courageous thing to do. And for any of those who have spent any time in a refugee camp or with international aid workers who have, under cover of darkness and under threat of their own lives, delivered aid to those most needy, to suggest that delivering such aid is not a courageous act, well then shame on my friends across the way. Shame on all those that suggest that the only courageous thing that Canada can offer the world is a bombing mission in Iraq. And to show out that the government's sense of disproportion around this issue, that the rhetoric that they offer up in this place, that this is a global threat, that this is a threat that is in direct and immediate danger to Canada, and then suggest that to counter such a threat, as was suggested, some allegory to the Second World War, as was purported here just minutes ago, is the equivalent of what's going on in Iraq today, and then to suggest Canada's response militarily will be 6 planes, is incoherent. If what ISIS represents is a clear and present danger to this country, on the order that was represented by the Nazis in the Second World War, as was just suggested, then one would conclude logically that Canada's response would be more than 6 fighter jets over 6 months. But that's what they're suggesting. They're also making another false suggestion between false choices, that the only way Canada can offer aid is in some conjunction with military bombing mission, that they can't be one without the other. Well, of course that's false. Of course that's false, because Canada has a proud and noble history of delivering aid into war zones around the world for generations, without the assistance of Canada's military performing bombing missions at the same time. So, what we have is the repeat of history, that as often has been said, the first casualty of war is the truth. And when the Prime Minister stands in the House of Commons in our Parliament and says, "I have neither the will nor the desire to get into the details here," says the Prime Minister of Canada on the eve of an engagement of war, is shameful for the Prime Minister to suggest. He may be frustrated with the questions. He may find that the opposition leader, in asking such tough questions as how many military personnel do we have on the ground in Iraq? What is our exit strategy in Iraq? What will the cost of the mission likely be in Iraq? Well, the Prime Minister may grow frustrated with that, and he may not have the will nor desire to answer such questions, but Canadians deserve answers to these questions before we send our troops into harm's way. The U.S. has provided such answers. They've costed the war out to this point and done projections for the American people. We can't even find out where our planes are going to be based. Well, the UK government has told its people that, yet we find the Canadian government unwilling, unable to offer the truth and say simply, "Trust us." Well, the Democrats will not rubber stamp a mission into the Middle East because there have been hard-fought lessons just learned over the last decade that it is easy to get into an incursion, but it is very difficult to get back out. And that a mission that starts off as a 30-day non-combat role turns into a 6-month bombing mission, which turns into something else. Because the other contradiction in the so-called plan offered up from the Conservatives is that, as every military expert has said, that you cannot defeat ISIS by bombing from 35,000 feet alone. There must be, quote-unquote, boots on the ground. But the Conservatives have promised not to offer that the Iraqi forces in Iraq will take care of that. And somehow, contradictorily, the Prime Minister of this country, of Canada, has said, we won't bomb into Syria, even though that's where much of ISIS is taking place, without the permission of Assad, a dictator and despot who Canada has been forcefully trying to remove from office. We're going to wait for his permission to conduct the mission. The contradictions that are rife in the Conservatives' proposal to this point fill us with grave concern over Canada's role. Now, as we have seen in Afghanistan and we've seen in other places, when it's military and there is humanitarian aid offered by the Conservatives, the ratio comes in somewhere about 10 to 1. Every $10 we spend militarily, we spend about $1 on the humanitarian side. Now, that is a ratio that the Conservatives might feel at peace with when you have 1.7 million refugees that have left Iraq. I was in Turkey before this summer, meeting with Turkish officials there that were pleading with Canada to get engaged because the over 1 million refugees from Syria and Iraq that were in southern Turkey at that time were receiving no assistance from the Canadian government. And the concern from the Turks was the people in those refugee camps, without shelter, without assistance, and without hope, can very easily be turned into soldiers for ISIS. And Canada showed no concern for this. And so the disproportion of response and the inadequate response does not match the rhetoric that has been offered by the Conservative Party to this point and by this Prime Minister. The fact that we're shutting down the very debate that is being held now. Because some Canadians might say this. They say, what's a debate around 6 planes going to Iraq? How does that matter? Why should we have so much concern for that? Well, we concern ourselves with whenever we send our military into combat. But we also know that this is the first step of likely many. Because it's been a bit of a moving target. Now, the Conservatives have claimed that the Liberals have had a position that is also wavered, and I won't argue with them on that. But when we ask a simple question of the Conservatives, of this Prime Minister, how would he measure success? How would his government measure success? We have 3 distinct answers when it comes to ISIS. Well, we're going to contain them. That's going to be success for Canada. No, not contain them. We're going to degrade them so that they can't attack anymore. And at one point, we were going to eliminate them. Mr. Speaker, those are all 3 very different things. When you're dealing with a guerrilla group that commits such horrific acts as this one. If elimination is Canada's terms for success, then let's all agree on one thing. A 6-month bombing campaign of 6 planes of Canada's contribution will not satisfy that. And we can't pretend it otherwise. And clearly the humanitarian crisis that is happening in Iraq and Syria right now is not the only qualification for Canada to get involved. Because clearly we would have been in the Congo. We would have been in Darfur. We would have been in Syria before this. Because all of those 5 million people killed in the Congo. Did we talk about bombing missions then? Did we talk about Canada's military getting involved then? No. So clearly this is a combination of events that has drawn this Conservative government into a war in Iraq. And we all know that this Prime Minister, when he was in opposition, when Canada was debating the first Iraq war, perpetrated by W. Bush, this Prime Minister actually went into this Prime Minister as opposition leader, went into the United States and chided and scolded Canada for not going into Iraq with the U.S. in the ill-fated mission. That was this Prime Minister's position when he was in opposition. He thought Canada was wrong to stay out of Iraq the first time. And yet now he thinks he has the terms and judgments to dictate a new war in Iraq. Now, we must ask one question about the politics of this. Because as my friend across the way said, he alluded to our position having something to do with a reach out to a base or against the base. We've seen the Conservatives actually launch a fundraising campaign on this issue. No, they did. Because of the insensitive and ridiculous comments from the Liberal leader, the Conservatives have now sent out a fundraising email. And you question what the tactics are of this party. And how can they, for a minute, just take this option to remove the narrow-minded, base-playing politics and do something that's right for this country and bring forward a resolution that can be supported by this country, bring the opposition leaders into the room, find common ground for Canada's role in the world, rather than the divide and conquer strategies we so often see from this government. We can do better. New Democrats demand better of this government. We see a better role for Canada in this world, and we're going to insist on it and form that government in 2015. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that was a rather sad and unfortunate speech, given the high quality of debate that we've seen here over the last couple of days, Mr. Speaker. I've been, of course, in the chamber, and I've heard a number of members, including myself, who have highlighted the fact that, yes, well, we have a difference of agreement here. On this particular mission, it's quite obvious that the NDP have been very clear from the outset that they were not going to support the motion that was brought forward. I think a number of members on this side have enunciated that. We also have heard the Minister of International Development talk about the importance of Canada providing and continuing to provide humanitarian assistance. We've talked about the fact that Canada is amongst one of the highest contributors in the world. It's something that we've been doing for many months, Mr. Speaker. But again, the member for Elmwood-Transcona, he talked about some of the important initiatives that Canada has taken in the past with other allies. So again, I'd ask the member, not specific to this motion, because we understand the NDP are not going to support this motion. But in the future, Mr. Speaker, under what conditions would the NDP ever support a Canadian combat mission in times of world strife? What are the conditions under which the NDP would support Canadian forces moving abroad to protect communities or countries that need our help?
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Buckley Valley.
First, allow me to address the criticism I received from my friend about the quality of debate in the House of Commons and the quality of my interjections. It's a bit rich, coming from somebody who has declared his job is to avoid giving proper answers, who had to apologize, another one entering the debate of quality of conversations in Parliament. So I must address that first because he raised it in his question. To suggest that he somehow now is the judge and arbitrator of what passes for quality of conversation and debate in this House is a bit much. Now, with respect to his specific question, unlike his government, New Democrats have proposed actual ideals and principles when Canada seeks intervention in the world. For example, United Nations resolutions, which this government has said the UN resolution on Iraq permits and encourages this bombing mission. An absolute and outright falsehood, because, Mr. Speaker, I've got the UN resolution right in front of me. And what it does say is that countries signatory to this and countries in agreement with this must do several things. Now, my friend asked, and now we can't hear the answer to his question, that a UN resolution would have some strength. The UN has not given such a resolution. The UN has said a number of things Canada can do: prevent fighters from entering ISIS, stop the funding to ISIS, and we hear nothing of this from this government. We hear CF-18s, because when you only have a hammer in the toolbox, every problem looks like a nail.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for